The Communication Station. Antimatter Society, Episode 2. The third shift began at the second bell, when the wrong-colored sun had fully set and the previous operators had gone home to sleep. Tael arrived early, as he always did.
"Routine day?"
said Marin, pulling on her coat. She was third year, nearly done with her apprenticeship, and she had the particular efficiency of someone who had stopped being impressed by the work.
"Yield reports from the Keleth Agricultural Collective. Cultural Archive Amendment, Section 41. They've updated the textile notations again."
Again?
"Third time this cycle? The originals are nothing if not thorough."
He settled into the receiver's chair and ran through the calibration sequence the way Master Orvith had taught him. Left array first, then right, then phase alignment. 12 steps. He had it memorized by his third week. He did it carefully anyway because Orvith had told him that the operators who got careless with calibration were the ones who missed things, and missing things at the communication station was not the kind of mistake you made twice. Outside, the road between the harbor town and the mill town ran past the station's eastern wall. Tael could hear traffic sometimes, in the quiet hours. The station had been built here deliberately, between the two largest settlements, equidistant, belonging to neither, a thing shared, not owned. He filed the yield reports. He made tea. He waited for the next signal. The signal was 4 hours late. He ran the diagnostic the way Orvith had taught him for signal interruption, a 20-step process more thorough than the nightly calibration, designed to distinguish equipment failure from genuine absence. The arrays reported nominal on every channel, no interference, no degradation, nothing wrong with the equipment. He logged the absence in the standard notation, one line, the date, signal not received, and sat back and thought about physics.
Matter and antimatter annihilate on contact.
Orvith had said on his first day, in the particular tone of someone who had explained the same thing many times.
You know this.
He had known it from school. Orvith wasn't finished.
So they cannot send us anything made of matter, only light, because photons are their own antiparticles.
He had set down his tea.
A photon is identical to its antimatter equivalent, CPT symmetry. It doesn't matter which side of the divide it originates from. Light is light. It crosses freely where nothing else can. Now, their galaxy is millions of light years from ours. By ordinary physics, a message would take millions of years to arrive. Contact would be impossible. The project would never have begun.
A pause.
But 60 years before the project started, our astronomers began detecting something unusual. Faint transmissions arriving from deep intergalactic space from no source they could identify. They traced the signals back. What they found was a fold in the space-time between the galaxies, a natural structure in the void that the transmissions had been crossing for years before anyone was in a position to receive them. The matter civilization had been broadcasting into what they believed was empty space. We heard them. We followed the signal to the fold.
He had picked up his tea again.
The fold shortens what would otherwise be millions of years of travel to roughly 1 to 2 years each way. Without it, there is no contact, no project, no replica, no archive, no station. Two civilizations in separate galaxies, neither knowing the other exists. The fold is why we are here. We are the place where light becomes something else.
Tael had found this, on reflection, slightly overwhelming. The entire world, the harbor town, the mill town, the road between them, every person he had ever known, contingent on someone having been listening at the right moment, centuries before anyone now living had been born. 5 hours now. He ran the diagnostic again. The thought arrived during the second pass, and once it arrived he could not set it aside. If the lag through the fold was 18 months, then whatever had happened on the other side had happened 18 months ago. He was sitting here waiting for a signal that had been sent, or not sent, a year and a half in the past. Whatever the silence meant, it was not new. It had already happened, over there, while he was filing yield reports and going home. He had not known. And in those 18 months, while the other side had already gone quiet, the replica had kept transmitting every day. Crop yields, observation reports, cultural notes, all of it crossing the fold toward a civilization that had already stopped listening. Those transmissions were still in transit now. They would arrive, if anything received them, over the coming year and a half. He did the further calculation alone, sitting in the receiver's chair in the dark, and did not share it with anyone. If the other side had gone silent and then resumed, their resumption signal would take 18 months to arrive, meaning the replica could already be living inside a resolution they did not know about. The silence they were experiencing could already be over. There was no way to know. There was no way to ask. You could only wait for what the fold chose to bring you on its own timeline, carrying information about a past you could not change and a present you could not see. He thought, we are always living in their past. We have always only ever known them as they were. He thought sometimes on quiet nights about counterparts he would never meet, whether there were people in some unreachable place running the same diagnostics in the small hours, thinking their own quiet thoughts about the gap between what arrived and what could be felt. He had no confirmation such people existed. He had found nothing in the transmissions that confirmed it. But in the still of the night shift, when the arrays were quiet and the log was current, the thought came anyway. What had their world made of them? Did their wine taste wrong? Was their sun the right color? He wondered if they thought about him. It seemed, on those nights, like an enormous thing to have in common with someone you would never meet. His thoughts would settle eventually on the originals themselves, the antimatter civilization whose transmissions had built everything around him. Not the speculative counterparts, but the source, the people who had actually done this. The replica were their children in some sense, not metaphorically. The genome that built the replica had come from them. The language Tael spoke, the words for grief, for the quality of cold before dawn, for the particular sound the sea made when the tide turned, had been theirs first. He had inherited all of it through 9 generations of imperfect transmission, the way a river inherits its course from the mountains it came from. The source and the river were connected. They were not the same thing. And yet the people who had shaped him were unreachable in a way that had no ordinary equivalent. Orphaned children at least shared a universe with where their parents had been. Exiled people at least knew that home existed somewhere on the same world, under the same sky. The replica's source was in a galaxy that could not be entered. The people who had described them into existence lived in a place where the replica, if they somehow arrived, would annihilate on contact. The impossibility was not circumstantial. It was written into the physics of what each of them were. He had looked, early in his career, through the linguistic archive, all 11 volumes. There was no word for it. The antimatter language had no word for it either. Of course it didn't. The people who built the language had never needed to describe this situation. They had sent the language across the void before they could know what their replica would eventually need it for. He filed the absence in the logs. He ran the diagnostic a final time. At the end of his shift, he went home and told himself it would resolve. It did not resolve. For 2 years, the dominant theory was atmospheric interference. There had been a notable shift in the upper atmosphere readings around the time the silence began, and the station's senior operators spent considerable effort documenting the correlation. Studies were commissioned. Reports were filed. In the 3rd year, the dominant theory shifted to equipment failure. The arrays were replaced in parts, then overhauled twice, then replaced entirely. By the 10th year, the theories had run out. Late in the evening of the 10th year, Tael sat at his desk with transmission 7441 in front of him. The physical copy he had filed himself, the one he had pulled from the logs some months earlier and brought home without quite meaning to. A midweek agricultural report from the Keleth Collective. Crop yields and nothing else, nothing that marked it as the last one. He had always understood the archive as a live connection. Every practice, every recipe, every glass-blowing form, all held to a standard that could, in theory, still be verified. If something drifted, the originals were still speaking. You could check. Now they were not speaking, and the archive was simply a collection of documents from people who were no longer reachable. It had the same authority as any other historical record, none except what the living chose to give it. He thought about the wine. It had tasted wrong to every generation of the replica. Not unpleasant exactly, just not quite right, a degree of off that no one had ever fully articulated. The Preservation Council had run 3 investigations. The recipe was correct. He had read the engineer's notes in the archive. Technical language about the differences between the 2 universes at a level below genetics, below chemistry, somewhere in the deep structure of how matter and antimatter bodies were built. The notes were careful, even apologetic. The engineers had known. They had built the best approximation they could and understood it would not be exact, and they had left their explanations in the archive in the hope that someone would eventually understand them fully. Tael had not understood them fully, but he had understood enough. The wrongness was not in the recipe. No fidelity to the archive would close that gap, because the gap was not in the archive. And the sun. And the tides. And the way certain colors looked slightly different here, though no one could say exactly how they had looked before, because the only people who knew were unreachable. He thought about what word described that, what the replica were to the people who had made them. Orphaned children at least shared a universe with where their parents had been. The replica's source was in a galaxy they could never enter. The people who had shaped them could not come, not if they wanted to, not if every one of them decided tomorrow that the replica deserved to be met. They still could not come. Matter and antimatter annihilated on contact, completely, without remainder. The barrier was not a wall to be crossed. It was a physical law. It had been in place before the replica existed, before the project began, before either civilization had known the other was there. The replica had been born into a permanent physical separation from the source of themselves. They had never had their parents. They had had transmissions from their parents, patterns of light that carried the genome and the language and the recipes and the instructions for glass blowing and the forms for the weavers to weave. And then one day the transmissions had stopped, and the replica were left with what they had always actually had, the record of a family they had never been able to touch. This was, he thought, why the solstice observances felt like grief even when they were described as celebration, why the Preservation Council's fidelity felt less like devotion and more like the behavior of people who had been told to be exactly like someone they had never met and could only guess at what exactly meant. Why the archive felt simultaneously like everything and like nothing, because it was everything they had ever received and nothing like being known. The grief of it had a ceiling he could now see clearly. Ordinary grief, the loss of a parent, a home, a family, had somewhere within it the abstract possibility of return. Even across death there were people who kept vigil, who felt the keeping of it meant something. The silence was different. The originals could not return, not if they wanted to, not if every one of them chose it. The barrier was not circumstance, it was physics. And that meant the grief, however real, had a fixed shape. You could name its edges. Davin came in and found him still at his desk. She was senior operator herself by now, steadier than him, with the patience of someone who had grown up in the silence rather than arrived at it. She didn't ask what he was reading. After a moment she sat at her own desk and waited.
They are gone.
Davan didn't answer. After a moment she rose and trimmed the lamp, and the light steadied, and neither of them spoke about it again that night. He sat with the transmission in front of him. He thought, we have been asking permission from a document. The document was designed for people who no longer exist in any form we can reach. We are what happened when their description arrived here. We are what this universe made of it. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that was always the only possible answer. And then he thought, somewhere in the grammar of what he was, in the space between what he had been made from and what he had become, there was a word that didn't exist yet. Perhaps it would have to be made. In the 15th year he called Davan into his office and told her the station was hers. She did not argue. She had known it was coming. She was, by then, better at the work than he was. steadier, more methodical, never having known the transmissions as a living thing, only as historical record. The silence was not a loss to her the way it was to him. It was simply the condition she had been trained into. She would maintain the logs. She would train the next apprentice. She would run the diagnostic sequence every morning and log the absence in the standard notation, and she would do it for as long as she lived, because that was the kind of person she was, and because someone had to. He stood in the doorway for a long time. He thought about what leaving meant. He had spent his whole career attending to what came from elsewhere, making himself into the place where light became something else, staying in the room in case it mattered. Leaving was deciding he was done waiting. And waiting for the people you came from was not something you stopped doing because the rational case had collapsed. He had known for 5 years that they were gone. He had come in every morning anyway. He understood it now. There was a difference between staying close to the people you came from and staying close to the loss of them. He had been doing the second while believing he was doing the first. They were not the same. He took transmission 7441 from the desk when he left. He had been the one to receive it. It seemed right that he should carry it. He reached the harbor before noon. The tide was going out. He had grown up with tides. They were simply what the sea did, the rhythm the world had always had. The antimatter world had no tides. The first generation had apparently found this disorienting, then alienating, then ordinary. His generation had never found it anything other than the sea behaving exactly as it should. He watched the water draw away from the stones and thought, we came from people who had no tides, and we are people who have always had tides. The world shaped us differently than it shaped them, and it could not have done otherwise. This is a different world, governed by different physics, lit by a sun they would not have recognized. We followed the blueprint exactly, and we built a different building. And the building is real. It has tides. It has a sea that goes out every 9 hours and comes back, and the people who live by it have never known anything else. He thought, we are not a copy that failed. We are something that hasn't been named. Someone should start naming it. He turned from the water and walked into the harbor town. He passed the Glassmakers' Guild that afternoon and stopped at the window without meaning to, watching an apprentice of the furnace. The glass moved in the particular way that liquid things move when they are becoming something else. Not flowing, not setting, but in the narrow middle state where it could still be shaped. The apprentice turned the rod slowly, evenly, with the patience the work required. He thought about what Orvith had told him on his first day. We are the place where light becomes something else. He had spent his career being that. Perhaps there were other ways for things to become something else. Perhaps it did not always require a signal from somewhere else to begin. He presented himself to the guildmaster the following morning.
You're not young.
No.
Glasswork takes years to learn.
I have years. I have spent most of them receiving things from elsewhere. I would like to spend some of them making something that belongs here.
She pointed him toward the apprentice's bench and told him to watch and say nothing until he was spoken to. He was not naturally gifted. His hands, trained to calibration and careful notation, were precise but unaccustomed to heat. He broke things. He misjudged temperatures. He produced in his first year a great quantity of glass that was not what he had intended. He found, to his surprise, that he did not mind. The failures were his. The archive had no record of them. They were entirely irreducibly his own, products of his hands in this world, under this sun, on this tidal shore, even the broken pieces. He kept transmission 7441 in his coat pocket. On the days when the work frustrated him, he would take it out and hold it. The surface worn smooth from years of handling, the characters still clear. He had stopped thinking of it as a loss and started thinking of it as a record. This is where we came from. This is what they sent. This is what arrived. What arrived was us, and we are making something now with our own hands in a world they never saw. He was still thinking about it, decades later, when a young glassmaker brought him a vessel that had slumped in the kiln and asked him what she should do with it.